This video is based on publicly available reports, court documents, and media coverage. At the time of this recording, Kouri Richins has pleaded not guilty to the charges against her. This story is presented for informational purposes only.
At first glance, they looked like the perfect family. A successful husband. A smiling wife. 3 young sons. A beautiful home in Utah. And after tragedy struck, the grieving widow captured the hearts of many people across America when she published a children's book about loss, written for her sons after the sudden death of their father. People saw her as strong, as loving, as inspirational. But behind the sympathy, investigators say something far darker was unfolding. Because while the world believed she was mourning her husband, police were quietly building a case against her. A case involving secret financial problems, suspicious messages, alleged drug deals, and a deadly dose of fentanyl. And then came the question that shocked everyone. Did the woman who wrote a book about grief actually cause the grief herself? This is the disturbing story of Kouri Richins. Before the headlines, before the courtroom appearances, before the accusations, there was a family that appeared to have everything. Kouri Richins and her husband, Eric Richins, lived in Utah with their 3 sons. To outsiders, their life looked stable and successful. Eric was known as careful, disciplined, and financially smart. Friends described him as cautious and hardworking. Kouri appeared outgoing and ambitious. She worked in real estate and often presented herself as a dedicated mother and entrepreneur. But behind closed doors, things were reportedly becoming complicated. Investigators later claimed the marriage had been struggling for years. According to reports, financial disagreements were creating serious tension between the couple. And money would later become one of the most important parts of this story. Eric allegedly began questioning some of Kouri's financial decisions. Court documents and media reports would later suggest that he had concerns about properties, spending, and debt. At one point, reports claimed Eric had even changed aspects of his estate planning and life insurance arrangements. And investigators would later argue that these decisions may have created conflict inside the marriage. But from the outside, nobody could see the storm building. To neighbors and friends, they still appeared like a normal family. Which made what happened next even more shocking. In March of 2022, Eric Richins was at home. According to reports, the couple had been celebrating after Kouri sold a house. That night, she allegedly prepared a Moscow Mule cocktail for her husband. At some point later, Eric became unresponsive. Emergency responders were called. But it was already too late. Eric Richins was dead. At first, the death stunned people around him. He was reportedly healthy, active, young. The situation felt sudden and unexplained. Then investigators discovered something alarming. An autopsy reportedly revealed fentanyl in Eric's system. Not just traces, a lethal amount. And suddenly, the case transformed from a tragic death into something much darker. Because fentanyl is one of the deadliest drugs in America. Tiny amounts can kill. And investigators began asking a terrifying question. How did it get into Eric's body? At first, there were no immediate public accusations. But behind the scenes, detectives had already started digging deeper. And what they allegedly uncovered would turn this case into national news. Months after Eric's death, Kouri Richins appeared in public with a new mission. She released a children's book about grief. The book was reportedly inspired by the loss of her husband and intended to help children cope with death. To many people, it seemed heartfelt. A grieving mother trying to help her children heal. Media interviews followed. Sympathy poured in online. And for a moment, the story looked almost inspirational. But then everything changed. Because while Kouri was publicly discussing grief and healing, investigators were allegedly building evidence that pointed directly at her. And when news of the investigation became public, the children's book suddenly took on a completely different meaning in the eyes of many people. Online reactions exploded. People began revisiting interviews, photos, statements, and the emotional contrast became impossible to ignore. A woman talking publicly about grief, while police allegedly believed she was responsible for causing it. The case quickly became one of the most talked about true crime stories in the country. But investigators still needed more than suspicion. They needed evidence. And according to prosecutors, that evidence was beginning to pile up. As detectives continued examining Eric's death, they allegedly uncovered disturbing details. According to prosecutors, investigators traced communications that suggested Kouri had allegedly attempted to obtain fentanyl before Eric's death. Reports claimed police discovered messages connected to drug purchases. And that was only the beginning. Investigators also focused heavily on finances. According to reports, there were allegations involving debt, property disputes, and financial pressure. Prosecutors would later argue that money may have been a motive. Then came another shocking detail. Authorities alleged there may have been a previous attempt to poison Eric before the fatal incident. That revelation stunned the public. Because if true, it suggested planning. Not impulse. Not accident. Planning. Meanwhile, the internet exploded with theories. Some people believed investigators had uncovered overwhelming evidence. Others warned against rushing to judgment. And as media coverage intensified, every detail became heavily scrutinized. Body language in interviews, public appearances, statements to friends. Nothing escaped attention. But one of the most chilling aspects of the case remained the contrast between Kouri's public image and the accusations against her. A grieving widow, a mother, an author, accused of secretly orchestrating her husband's death. The story felt almost unbelievable. But prosecutors were preparing to formally act. And soon, the entire country would hear Kouri Richins' name. In 2023, authorities arrested Kouri Richins. The charges shocked the nation. News outlets everywhere covered the story. The woman who had publicly discussed grief and healing was now accused of murdering her husband. Court documents revealed disturbing allegations. Investigators claimed Kouri had obtained fentanyl and administered it to Eric through the drink he consumed that night. Prosecutors described the case as intentional and calculated. Meanwhile, Kouri denied the allegations. She pleaded not guilty. And almost immediately, debate erupted online. Some people believed the prosecution's theory made sense. Others argued that the public was convicting her before trial. Social media became flooded with discussions. True crime creators analyzed every update. Comment sections exploded with arguments. And once again, the children's book became central to public fascination. To many people, it symbolized something deeply unsettling. Because the timing felt impossible to ignore. After months of investigation, after shocking allegations, after one of the most talked about murder trials in recent years, the fate of Kouri Richins was finally placed in the hands of a jury. Prosecutors argued that Kouri carefully planned the murder of her husband, Eric Richins. They pointed to alleged fentanyl purchases, financial motives, insurance fraud, and evidence suggesting there had even been a previous attempt to poison him before his death. The defense maintained her innocence. They argued the prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and insisted reasonable doubt still existed. But after deliberating for only a few hours, The jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on aggravated murder. Guilty on additional felony charges connected to fraud and the alleged poisoning attempts. The courtroom fell silent. For many people following the case, the verdict felt like the final shocking chapter in a story that had already stunned the nation. But the most emotional moment was still to come. In May 2026, Kouri Richins stood before the judge for sentencing. Family members of Kouri Richins delivered emotional statements in court. And according to reports, even the couple's children expressed fear about their mother ever being released from prison. Then the judge delivered the sentence. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge reportedly described her as too dangerous to ever be freed. And just like that, the woman once publicly known as a grieving widow and children's book author became a convicted murderer sentenced to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Today, the case of Kouri Richins remains one of the most talked about true crime stories in recent years. And despite the headlines, interviews, theories, and accusations, there are still unanswered questions. What truly happened inside that home? What was really happening in the marriage behind closed doors? And how did a story that once looked like a tragedy of grief become a story of suspicion and alleged murder? For Kouri Richins' family, the loss remains devastating. For the public, the case remains deeply unsettling. And for many people watching from the outside, one detail still stands out above all others. The children's book. Because to some, it looked like the act of a grieving mother. And to others, it became one of the most haunting symbols in modern true crime. The story of Kouri Richins became one of the most disturbing true crime cases in America, not only because of the murder allegations, but because of the contrast. A loving image on the outside, and behind it, a case prosecutors described as calculated, financial, and deadly. Even now, the case continues to spark debate online. Some people still question certain details. Others believe the verdict brought justice for Kouri Richins and his family. But one thing remains impossible to ignore. The haunting irony that a woman who wrote a children's book about grief would ultimately be sentenced for causing the very grief she claimed to understand. What do you think about this case? Do you believe investigators uncovered the truth, or is there more to the story than the public knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories.